Hey everyone, it's Denise Brown, and welcome to our Caregiving Book Club. It's a podcast where we introduce you to authors of caregiving books, and typically these authors also have a personal caregiving experience. So we also talk about what's it like to transform that experience into a book. So I'm thrilled and delighted to have Donna Thompson with us today and Dr. Zachary White. Hi everyone. Hi Donna. Hi Zachary.
Hi, Denise.
Hi, Denise.
And Donna and Zachary collaborated on a book called The Unexpected Journey of Caring. And Donna also is the author of a book called The Four Walls of My Freedom. So let's talk first about your collaboration. Curious how you two first connected.
Donna, you lead on this. You always tell this so well.
Okay. Well, the funny thing is that Zachary and I wrote this book without ever having met. I know, except for 1 million times on Skype and FaceTime and everything. But I think, Zachary, you and I discovered each other through our respective blogs. And I have a blog called The Caregiver's Living Room. And Zachary, your blog is called The Unprepared Caregiver. And I remember discovering your blog, and it was like an explosion went off in my head. And I thought, this is the most authentic, original writing about finding the words to express experiences that we have in caregiving that are normally, we would assume, too complicated to even begin to try to describe to somebody else, let alone tell ourselves in the stories in our head. And so I reached out to you and I said, I simply want to know more about Zachary White and your research, and how did you come to these ideas? And I think it was a while before we figured out that maybe there could be a theoretical bridge between the work that I do and your work. But maybe you can talk about that, Zachary.
Well, you're too kind, Donna. It was a two-way street when I came across Donna's work online and the Caregiver's Living Room. And Donna, for your listeners, Denise, and maybe they probably know, she's one of the most prolific personas in the online space, and most genuine, heartfelt, deeply insightful, and drawing upon a lifetime of caregiving experiences that I felt like I had met a dear lost friend that just kind of a spirit in heart and our passion for those impacted by care and what the care experience does in ways that oftentimes, as Donna was saying, isn't necessarily talked about because it involves a deep amount of reflection and understanding of how we're implicated by the culture that we live in and the ways in which people react or respond to what care means and how that shapes our relationships. And so we started with a couple of workshops, Denise, and it was almost like I was trying out. I was like, trying out for the team. And Donna, I thought, gosh, I really want Donna to feel that what I'm bringing something, because her experiences are so vast and cut across the intersections of care so dynamically that we did a couple of workshops, and I just felt like, it was just so right in so many ways. And then I think I popped the question in a way, Donna. I said, would you be willing to think about taking some of our ideas in terms of kind of this, what does care mean and how does it affect our relationships, and how do we enact it and advocate for ourselves, an area in which Donna is such an expert in terms of understanding how to leverage and solicit engagement from others. And we combined those. So it wasn't going to be just let's talk about care, or let's just talk about the tasks of care. It's a combination of these, I think, in a way that we're very proud of in terms of the book, that you get more of a holistic understanding of both care as an individual relational experience and as an experience for reaching out to others.
So I love that we're talking today because you are the first collaborative authors that we've had on the podcast. So everybody else has individually written a book. Tell us how you figured out who does what. And then how did you keep each other accountable for who does what?
I think we're both really, really disciplined. Um, so the main part at first was that we needed to agree on the premise. We didn't have any trouble doing that. So we decided, like Zachary said, that our idea was that if we could take Zachary's work about helping people develop a sense of care literacy, of being able to describe how their life has been transformed by caregiving and transformed deeply and permanently, because there will never be any going back to the person you were before you started caring. So when things are very complicated at home, there's an intense ambivalence, so opposite feelings happening at the same time. And Zachary is a master at helping me and others understand how to begin to answer the question, how am I? Who am I? What's just happened today? What do I hope for? What do I fear? How have I changed? And so we thought if we could help people understand that language, then maybe we could begin to think about a new conception of yourself as a caregiver in the context of belonging in your family, in your community, in your country, and claiming this new identity and saying, I have value and I have support needs and I have lots of things to give and to contribute. And being able to understand the deeply personal in relation to the community was what we wanted to try to achieve. So basically, the first half of the book is penned by Zachary, and it's all about that language. And then the second half of the book is the principles of asset-based community development, advocacy, online support, understanding that your social relationships may need to be redrawn. Who's going to be your friend in this role? We talk a lot about that. So, and thinking outside the box in terms of the idea of building a team, a crew that, are going to be in your circle of care, and in a way that is not going to overwhelm any one person, including yourself. So.
What I think is interesting is you touched upon a huge misconception around loneliness during caregiving. And I remember a few years ago, someone tweeted an idea. What if family caregivers did FaceTiming with friends and that would help with their loneliness? And I thought, but that's not the problem. We know how to FaceTime people. We just don't have anybody within our contacts who understands what it's like for us. That's the loneliness, the disconnect from someone who understands and someone who can listen to us during a difficult time. Zachary, tell us a little bit more about your insight into that.
I think you said it so well, Denise, and that's what I think Donna and I are really proud of, is that we try to, you hear so much talk about kind of transformation. And the second part of our title is the transformation from loved one to caregiver. And this gets at what you're saying, Denise, to the extent that if you watch popular shows like Oprah, wonderful shows, but people see the before and after, and they focus on kind of that transformation as a product, not as a process. And Donna and I really focused in on helping caregivers and people impacted by care understand what happens and why their thoughts and their beliefs and their relationships change and evolve and become maybe distorted, and they almost feel like they are disloyal to who they once were. The people that they once felt so close to, these friends and family for years on end, now feel like strangers. And so oftentimes when we talk about support needs, we think about I don't like that person anymore, or I don't want to be around these people, but we don't understand why that's the case. We get stuck on the names, which are really important, but there's more going on. So we talk a lot about our kind of growing intolerance for others and why that's the case, and why we might feel more comfortable in the company of those that we don't know, who are able to understand, who are non-judgmental, who listen, who don't always provide a solution in ways that we don't invite. And so when you read our book, I think that it's almost as if we're providing an entry point to begin to reflect on your own experiences in ways that sometimes are really hard when you're in the midst of it. And I think that that's something that one of the things we're really proud of, because it is, like you say, it's not, Denise, it's not because you don't have contacts. That's not it. It's because your worldview has changed, and care shapes us. We are shaped by the roles and the experiences of caregiving that is informal. It's not a formal title. We don't have the protection of objectivity. We don't have uniforms if we're talking about kind of the personal experience of care. But Donna, we sure are impacted, aren't we?
Yeah, for sure. Like I have been a caregiver my entire adult life. And, I gave up working 32 years ago when our son was born with severe disabilities, but cared for my mom too, and my dad and my stepfather. And so I think, yeah, I mean, when I think about, I searched for a long time, thought for many years, what the heck happened to me? And what the heck does it mean? And, I think that I felt like so many other people I know, completely invisible to myself even. And it took a long time to kind of try to make meaning of my own experience and understand that, we live in a world where millions of people experience the same thing that I did. And that, we can reach out to those people. And I do every day, multiple times a day, talk to other caregivers and discover a world of friendship and support. And so I think that it's a personal transformation, but I think there's beginning to be a cultural transformation too. And I think, Denise, you are such a leader in the cultural transformation of care. And we are seeing, and I'm very hopeful, now we are seeing a recognition, yes, particularly in the United States. I live in Canada. We're trying to get a similar movement going to recognize care as infrastructure and fundamental to the functioning of the economy, because care is the work that makes all other work possible, as we know. So
I just want to mention an idea I have floated for years. I first blogged about it probably in 2017, and that was that family caregivers are issued lab coats. So they are a healthcare professional on a healthcare professional team. And then I talked about it at a patient advocacy conference in you know what? I don't know. I think it was 2019. I mean, it's so funny how you just like lose time. Yeah. I think it was 2019. And one of the attendees came up to me and said, my dad has been in a long-term care facility. I went one day and he was in a terrible way. What was happening in the facility was just awful. And I was doing everything I could to get people to listen to me. This is what he needs. This is what he needs. He said, my sister went back, did the same thing. This is what he needs. This is what he needs. No one was listening to either one of us. He said, my sister went to her car and put on her lab coat because she's a doctor, and the conversation completely changed. Yeah. And I think it's interesting, Zachary, you talk about we don't have a uniform. And I wonder if it's a lab coat. Now, I don't know if that's the right solution, But I also know that when you bring your binder to a doctor's appointment and you're able to refer to notes and you have all the information about what's happening and why it's happening, that conversation with the doctor changes too. So it's just interesting to think about, what will we look like as family caregivers in the future? I just want to mention too, just as an aside, I had this great sponsor of the National Caregiving Conference, and we were going to try to issue lab coats to all the attendees and then have a workshop where it was an opportunity to actually design your lab coat with paints and watercolors and markers, however you want it to read. You could personalize it. We just ran out of funding, but that would have been really interesting to do that and see what happens when you go home. Take the lab coat out of your suitcase, and that's what you wear when you go to doctor's appointments, when you're visiting and during hospitalizations. Anyway, so that's my aside.
So love that, Denise, that idea, because it gets at the heart of what we're talking about, of legitimacy. And, you know, one of the ways that we sought to try to approach that in the book is that if we don't have names to begin to describe and explain our experiences, if we don't have our own voice, that is a kind of a voice that is not accounted for. It's not a relational voice that most people want to think about, because when we think about relationships, we're talking about kind of on their best terms, on a trajectory that has pinnacles and cultural milestones and markers that is recognized. But for caregiving, like the lab coat you talk about, Denise, we don't have that in caregiving. And Donna and I spent a lot of time making sure that we provided, if we don't have our own language of affirmation about what it is and who we are becoming in this process and what it might allow us to see or know about ourselves, not in a kind of Pollyanna way, but in a very deep, moving re-articulation of what most of the time we already know. We simply don't have the ways or the words or the means or the cultural benchmarks to explain them. And the most damning and challenging part for caregivers is met when you try to articulate what you find valuable or important about who you are and what you're doing with your loved one, only to be met with dismissal, rejection, neglect, right, Donna? I mean, it's just, it's devastating.
I mean, Zachary, in the book, you talk about the masks that we have to wear because other people only understand us through those masks. So we put them on to sort of please other people, but I'd love for you to tell a little bit of Denise and others who are listening a bit about more about those masks.
It's kind of like putting them on at, I mean, we wear, I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina. If I put on a wool sweater right now, I would feel constricted and I would have to get out of it. And caregivers are so good at accommodating because over time, we realize that it's too much energy, too much effort, too much misunderstanding, too much disappointment to authentically try to shape our reality and be met with, as Donna said, a variety of reactions that remind us that we're different, aberrant, and we're just not like everyone else. And so we become really good at putting on, you know, everything is okay mask, or I am the super person, or I am a saint and I have no feelings or problems or challenges. And in the process, we become good at that, and we save time and energy, and which are, you know, scarce resources. But it also assaults the soul. It assaults who we are. It assaults our experiences. And, you know, long into the night and in the early mornings, we must hold on to something because no one else is there to listen oftentimes. And so it becomes an exploration of what happens when the mask starts masking your own ability to find value. And that's the point I think Donna's talking about, of which she's absolutely right. You've led on, Denise. Culturally, this is what we're trying to get at is, you know, those masks have worked too well for too long for those who don't want to be involved or aware of how caregiving is a part of every relationship and is a part of every life cycle of a relationship. And if we continue to deny that, I think we're denying that part of love, as you mentioned pre our conversation here, that's so important, Donna. I mean, I've become infuriated by it at times.
Yeah. God forbid that you should be in rounds wearing a lab coat with, you know, clinicians and mention the L word, you know, talk about love. That would shut the conversation right down. It's we have really become very sort of we have industrial care. It's very commodified. You know, somebody said to me the other day that patients and caregivers have beliefs and healthcare providers have opinions. And, you know, and there's a great divide between the worth of opinions versus beliefs. So I think, you know, we just need to reinvent the whole conversation and the value of what we do and find new ways to come together in a sacred space that respects above and beyond the relationship. And, you know, the relationship between patient and clinician, the relationship between patient and caregiver, you know, the other kids in the family, everybody's who's implicated strongly by the illness experience. So yeah, this whole thing needs to be reinvented because there's this great big tendency, I think, to reduce everything to 10 top tips or to tasks or to, you know, some, like I'm just going to say crapiola, you know, that doesn't bear any, you know, resemblance to realities.
No, I know. I always read those. I used to keep track of headlines and I started going back to it, keeping track of headlines that just missed the mark, didn't speak to what we experienced, that were just all about, well, let's just make it surface because that's all we know how to do. And what's interesting is caregiving is a painful experience.
Yes.
It's a
Talk
painful
about that.
It's a painful experience for our carees, for ourselves, and it's also painful for our direct care workforce. I just finished a series of 3 interviews with family caregivers. We reflected on what our experiences were like during the pandemic, and one of the panelists, her experience is so heartbreaking because her mom has had Alzheimer's, was in a care facility, diagnosed with cancer, put on hospice, and then developed COVID, then tested positive for COVID. And there was nowhere for her mom to go. She couldn't stay in the facility. She couldn't be transferred to inpatient hospice. So Cameron took her mom home and cared for her during the last week of her life. She had a little bit of help from a hospice nurse that stopped by every day. She tried to hire overnight help, but was so concerned by the lack of appropriate PPE that the home health aide had that she just said, I got to do this myself. And we talked about how it just breaks our trust. And you talked about that, Zachary, when we wear the mask. It's because we can't trust anyone with our pain. We're in pain, but it's hard to talk about it because people run as soon as they see pain. And yet here we are in a system that we have to trust, but we don't trust it because it cannot deliver what we need. So what comes to mind, Zachary? I see you shaking your head. Tell us what you're thinking.
Just super profound what you're saying, and resonates with us so much. And that there's a story that we often talk about, Donna, that, you know, and it's, if we move beyond the intention component, which, you know, most people are maybe well-intentioned, but that doesn't necessarily protect us because good intentions still can have harmful consequences. And we talk about the book about the idea that at some point, almost every caregiver comes to the point in which they turn over the welcome mat in front of their house. And they realize that no, not all are welcome because all who enter have implications long after they leave. And those can be people that we know well, our neighbors, our family, our children, our parents, but it also can be health workers too. And all with great intentions, and all, you know, our neighbors might have the greatest cure all, of course, always in a fluid that we can easily digest and give to our loved ones, right? I mean, these are things that that they don't think about. But I recount a story caring for my own mother who had brain cancer that those conversations and those good intentions from people that we knew, from ministers to healthcare workers, were devastating at times because the human cost of vulnerability of allowing someone into this private space, the space in which she was dying, became also an invitation for some to share whatever they felt in the moment, which selfishly or not, you know, I literally did turn over the mat and I said, no more. I mean, I will not do this to my mother. And You can judge me as right or wrong on that, but I feel good to this day that, that was our part. We're both protectors and caregivers. And it's hard then also to get that opening up component on it that we talk about too with others,
I think at its heart, what you're talking about, Zachary, is what, you said, Denise, is this turning away from suffering instead of turning towards it. And it's a very difficult thing to do, to walk through an experience of suffering in companionship with someone, to suffer with them. And we're not socialized to do this. But, we quote a beautiful essay by David Brooks in the New York Times in our book. And I think he called it On Suffering. And he describes the nature of suffering, that you find yourself crashing through the floor of your house and, under the weight of pain and suffering, and you discover a basement floor and you crash through that, and you keep crashing through new levels of pain that you thought you could never endure and that you never knew existed. But we also talk about post-traumatic growth, because when you discover these, when you do walk through pain and suffering in companionship and compassion with somebody you deeply care about, as a family caregiver, somebody you love often, you discover revelations about yourself that I think offer us the glimpse of wisdom and and personal strength. Zachary, you talk a lot about that, about post-traumatic growth in our book, and you quote a lot of the research that you've done on that too.
I mean, it's taking this idea of our lived experiences and helping us understand ways to make sense of the depth and nuance that comes with that. And oftentimes the busyness of our experiences inhibit that, and the nature of caregiving makes it even more challenging than some other types of traumatic experiences, because it oftentimes is chronic and ongoing. And so kind of giving yourself that opportunity or that space to do it is really challenging, and it may not have an endpoint like other experiences that allow the retrospective look back apart from it. So it's always so close to us. But I mean, the depths of relationships, knowing what is important and valuable, understanding that what you thought of yourself is different than what you can do and what you have been doing and what you are doing. These are not superhuman qualities. These are simply qualities and ways of thinking about ourselves that require modification, because no caregiver, as we talked about before, is unchanged. And if the problem is, though, our networks see us oftentimes as the same, and that can be an inhibitor to the kinds of post-traumatic growth we're talking about. And so opening ourselves up, finding new networks of people who understand the depths of our experiences and allow us to talk through and shape changes in our beliefs, changes in our values, where change is not considered a betrayal, but it's really considered a part of what you've seen, a glimpse into what you know. Caregivers oftentimes say that they need like that leap of, how do I get you to understand what I'm going through? And I think perhaps at times starting with why I believe something different now than I did before is one way that all of us have access to. It's not a technical discussion. It's a discussion of us and our relationship to our experiences.
Yeah, and one really great, I think, exercise that you bring people through, Zachary, is just finish the sentence, my life before caregiving was like, and my life as a wife or a daughter now with caregiving is like, and try to think of a metaphor that is extremely vivid, that captures the truth of your experience. And I guess I can't I can't say strongly enough that how important I think it is to pay a great deal of attention to the stories we tell ourselves about these things in our own heads. I mean, when my mom died at the age of 96, after living with dementia for, I'm going to say, 10 years, she died, and it was very unexpected. We thought she was going to outlive us, me and my sister. Like, my mother was very strong-willed, really hard to look after. So unlike my son, who's easy to look after, even though he requires 24/7 awake nursing care, my mother was way harder. But so I remember just thinking, oh my gosh, I need to sit by water somewhere, a river or a lake or something, by myself and think, who was my mother to me? Who was I to my mother? Because all of the stories that I had said that just tripped off my tongue about who my mom was. Oh, she's such a, badass. And she's like, she got evicted from her seniors center and all this kind of stuff, smoking, drinking, eating chocolate right till the end. I just thought, none of these stories are really true anymore. I can no longer tell the story of who my mother was. These are not the truth anymore. First of all, I need to forgive her. I need to forgive myself for all the times I got so mad at her and turned away. And I love her, and I continue to love her, but how am I going to remember her? I don't know how. I don't know those stories in my head anymore. So caregiving, I think, makes you throw your life up as a deck of cards, or empties a filing cabinet all over the floor, and you have to figure out how to put it all back in the proper filing system and in a way that makes sense in it, but it's all new. So it's very challenging. And when we decided to write this book, Zachary and I, we said to each other, we are not skirting around these issues. We are going to do a deep dive into how messy and complicated this pain is. Yeah.
Something that we see out in the media a lot is this idea that caregivers don't take care of themselves, which makes me crazy, because we are taking care of ourselves.
Yes,
Self-care during caregiving is very different than before caregiving. And as you both know, my brother died last week. And so I've been doing what I can to stick with my rituals that take care of me. And one of them is to swim laps. And I didn't swim during the pandemic. And I started swimming again at the end of May because our outdoor community pool opened. And I will tell you, swimming again was a chore. I could not do it. I was just like, oh my gosh, anyway, but I kept at it. I thought the habit is that I go and swim every day. Yeah. At some point, it will give me back. I will get back. And I did. 2 months later, I was able to swim 30 minutes again. And I thought, you know what? These kinds of rituals, which is what we need during a life of caregiving, which is this life, give us something to live for after caregiving. The reason we do our best to keep a life during our life of caregiving is because caregiving ends, and we need a reason to live after it ends, because so much dies with our caree. We can't be that collateral damage. We have to figure out what gives us life. And as you both have been talking about, it changes during caregiving. What gives us life changes. And for us to embrace it and live it ensures that we live well after caregiving ends. Okay, we have been, this has been awesome. So I'm going to just ask one last question and then we'll close. And that is, what's the next book?
Zachary, what's our next book?
I think that, to be honest, I think our ongoing project, our our workshops that we do, continue talking, developing ideas, continue to give people the tools and the space to help help them facilitate some of what we do have in the book. I think that's what we're focused in on now, and we find great joy and pleasure of engaging with people where they are in their caregiving experiences. And I think it's not about a keynote for us. It's about how do we do what these kinds of skills that we talk about in the book and these reflection opportunities to develop the meaning that gives meaning to our lives, as you said, Denise. So that's my take, Donna.
Well, I think that, yeah, never say never to another book. But I think it's like if caregiving is a crystal, and you keep turning it a little bit to look through it a different way. We're always turning it over and thinking, like we gave not so long ago, we gave a 3-part series workshop on caregiving and family. So it was what happens with transitions into long-term care, for example, to the family. How can you be a family if somebody is living in long-term care? What happens to your family traditions, and what happens to your kids? And when caregiving comes and all your attention is on one person, what happens to everybody else? There is so much to say when you have paid caregivers in your home. That changes the family. So we talked all about that. And we have another series we're getting ready to do on belonging. Do I feel a sense of belonging in my own home anymore? In my family, at my work, in my neighborhood? How can you get belonging back? So yeah, we're always thinking, but I do think that we've talked a lot about rites and rituals to mark the caregiving experience as a form of self-care, but also as a form of validation. And Zachary, you and I might decide to do a book on rites and rituals.
You have this on recording, right, Denise? I can hold her accountable for that, right?
It's recorded. It's documented. So you can go back and say, remember. And Donna and Zachary, thank you both so much for being with us today. The name of your book is The Unexpected Journey of Caring. And tell us where our listeners and viewers can actually get a copy.
It is available from all online booksellers and from all libraries as well.
Okay. Thanks so much to both of you. It was awesome.
Thanks, Denise.
Thank you, Denise.
And thanks everybody so much for listening and watching. So appreciate this. And just a reminder, we have resources for libraries. We think that libraries are an unexpected resource or an overlooked resource for family caregivers in our communities. And we're doing what we can to really help libraries add more resources for family caregivers. And so we have a page of resources for libraries when you go to careyearsacademy.com/library. Thanks again, Donna, Zachary. Great to connect with you. And thanks everybody for listening. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.